Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, previewing Game 3, what we might expect to change in Game 3, what the Wolves need to make sure they keep doing, how the Timberwolves defense may change with Rudy Gobert back on the floor compared to what they did in Game 2, and also how to keep their offensive flow going. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And finally, it is game day once again. Game 3 of Wolves and Nuggets tonight at Target Center. By the way, the first time the Wolves have played at home in 16 days. 16 days. They won the first two against Phoenix, went on the road, had the big gap between games, had to start on the road this series. Back at Target Center for the first time in 16 days. It's going to be a madhouse. 8:30 p.m. Central tip tonight. Today on the show, we are previewing the matchup, what I think will change from games 2 to 3, mainly due to the presence of Rudy Gobert and also potential adjustments for Denver, whether it's the rotation or how they try and attack the Timberwolves defense. So we'll talk about all that on the show. I also want to talk about the Wolves offense, which has been basically the league's best offense through the playoffs so far, a pretty major departure from a middle of the pack offense in the regular season. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. And a reminder, it is a game day. So a reminder about the postcast. Not only do we cover your team every day right here on the regular Locked On Wolves show, we also have the Locked On Wolves postcast immediately following each and every Timberwolves game. You can find that on Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. It's live there. And then after the fact, we'll post the audio to this feed. So if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, your next show in your feed will be tonight's postcast with, I think it's Tyler Metcalf tonight with Candace Supis and hosted by Luke Inman. So check that out tonight. If you can watch it live, you're at home. Great. If you're at Target Center, you got to listen to it later. Listen to it here on the Locked On Wolves feed. Also, a reminder, if you can't watch the game live, you can listen on SiriusXM, our friends over there on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves. You'll get Alan Horton on the hometown call of Wolves Nuggets tonight. All right. So leading into game 3, things that we are pretty sure are going to happen. So the Wolves don't have anybody in the injury report. Rudy Gobert is going to play on Friday night. The Nuggets have Jamal Murray's officially listed as questionable. Obviously, we'd expect him to play. And then Reggie Jackson listed as questionable with I think it's an ankle injury that he hobbled off with, or ankle or calf that he hobbled off with at the end of or second half of game 2. That would be a potentially major absence if for no other reason than the Nuggets just don't have depth. And we've talked about that pretty extensively here on the show. I mean, like actually, that's how I closed Thursday's show. The Timberwolves are just a significantly deeper team than the Nuggets. Clearly, Michael Malone does not trust not even his deep bench, his bench, period. Outside of, apparently veteran Justin Holiday to some extent. Even Christian Brown only played 11 minutes last game, which was interesting to me. The take obviously is that Malone was like, hey, got to leave my best players on the floor as much as possible to overcome this deficit. But maybe the response should have been, I'm searching for something. And I know you don't want to appear desperate as the champs, but they're at that point. And if Christian Brown and Peyton Watson are going to give you, Peyton Watson played a few rotation minutes in that game. If they're going to give you energy and effort and some athleticism, a jolt of some sort, then I don't know. I would expect Michael Malone to make that tweak. And I know that veterans are what got them there, and veterans are what got them there last year. I mean, Christian Brown was part of the rotation last year for most of the year. Zeke Nnaji was a part of the rotation for most of the year. These guys are no longer in Denver's rotation. And it was their choice, obviously partly salary cap inflicted, but to move on from the Bruce Browns and the Jeff Greens and, a couple of years ago, Monte Morris, and even like not suggesting Bones Highland would make a difference in this series, but that's another one that last year was moved on. They moved on from, I guess, prior to them actually winning the championship. But rotation guys that had experience that were part of this team going back several years when they've been one of the best teams in the West, really going back to the pandemic-ish era. So I like all that to say, if Reggie Jackson doesn't play, it might actually be, in my opinion, a good thing for the Nuggets. He has not been good. And I know that he, in theory, provides some scoring punch for them and maybe would be helpful if Jamal Murray is not able to do so. If he's going to keep playing the way he has in game 1 and game 2. But in my mind, it's, can you get enough out of Peyton Watson? Can you get enough out of Christian Brown, who are probably going to be more efficient and certainly going to be better defenders than Reggie Jackson, have more size than Reggie Jackson? And then, if you need to use Justin Holiday too, and he's effectively helping run that offense, fine. I know that's not like the optimal Justin Holiday role, but like somebody's got to, right? Because who else is there? Like clearly, I talked about the November 1st game. Like back then, Julian Strawther was in the rotation. And remember, he was a first-round pick this year. He's not in the rotation anymore. Like they don't even have any other than Reggie Jackson. They don't even have any other true point guards on this roster. So it's going to be some combination of Murray, Caldwell Pope, Christian Brown, and I guess Justin Holiday, if Reggie Jackson can't go, that are going to kind of initiate some of the offense. But in my mind, if I'm Michael Malone, I just want to infuse some more energy into the team by using some of these bench guys. Related to that, with no Rudy Gobert in game 2, the Timberwolves, we talked about this on Thursday's show and maybe I think a little bit Wednesday too. It wasn't 100% the defense they played 2 years ago with Jared Vanderbilt and Patrick Beverley, but it was closer to that coverage than their typical drop coverage, right? They were trying to trap the ball. They were blitzing on the perimeter. They were switching when they needed to, but recovering and getting back. They were also, I forget how I described it on Thursday's show, but in pick and rolls, they were putting 2 on the ball briefly and then recovering to the roll man. I can't remember the term that I called it, but basically recovered to the roll man. They got a couple of steals that way with Murray just kind of like panicked with 2 guarding him and just whipping a pass to Jokic. But like, there's what I have in my mind where Nas peeled off and intercepted the pass because that was the coverage, right? Confuse them, show them length, etc. I think there's a time and a place for that in this game too. Like the Wolves have done a little bit of that with Rudy this year, but obviously he's so good in drop, and that worked great in game 1. I mean, I know compared to game 2, it was a close game. They still ended up winning by 7. But Rudy Gobert and drop, like Jamal Murray was never comfortable with him. It was just like Bradley Beal in the Suns series. Bradley Beal with Rudy on the floor was awful. He was petrified of getting within 16 feet of the basket because Rudy was always lurking. And that's not quite as effective against the Nuggets because, well, Murray's better, or at least he's supposed to be, and also Nikola Jokic, right? And the lob game. And occasionally if Jokic is handling and they kind of invert that, then you got the Jokic to Aaron Gordon lob you have to worry about. So in my mind, the Wolves defense likely goes back to what it was in game 1, but because game 2 is so effective, they have to find a way to not lose that intensity. And I'm not suggesting they weren't intense in game 1, but the non-order defense, as it's now apparently being called, of Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards just swarming on the perimeter, that can still be a thing as long as, if they do that plus Rudy covering on the back end as kind of the safety net, that could be extremely effective. I do think they play more drop. I think it'll be some sort of hybrid between game 1 and game 2. We'll have to see how they handle that. But the defense should only be better with Rudy Gobert on the floor. It's going to be really tough to replicate just that insane effort from game 2 on the perimeter. But they've had 4 days off, right? And I made that case earlier in the week. Like, that's going to really help the Wolves. 4 days off, get away from altitude. Rudy hasn't played in 6 days. Like, these guys should be fresh. And I always worry a little bit about offensive rust when they get that much time off, but it's only going to help them defensively, which is advantage Minnesota because of the way they play defensively and because of how flustered Denver was because of the Wolves defense in game 2. I want to talk about some specifics that I expect to happen or things the Wolves need to make sure they do in game 3 in order to hopefully go up 3-0 in the series. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action when you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch your winnings roll in. You can get in on the playoff action still and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the second round of basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Prize Picks has something for every sports fan: basketball, hockey, League of Legends, etc. You can pick LeBron, you can pick Connor McDavid, whoever your favorite. Well, you don't want to pick LeBron right now, would you? You can pick Anthony Edwards, you can pick Connor McDavid, all of the same entry. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The winning formula for championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay. Let's talk specifics about what to expect and what to watch for Minnesota in game 3 tonight at home. #1 for me, I don't know if this is necessarily the top thing, but it's the thing I'm maybe most concerned about, is the impact of rebounding. Last game when the Wolves won by 26, it didn't really matter because the Wolves defense was so good and Denver's offense was so bad, and it was legitimately both of those things, and obviously the Wolves defense was the primary factor for the offense struggling for Denver. But Minnesota ended up being a -8 on the glass. They gave up 18 offensive rebounds to Denver. Again, Denver missed a lot of shots. That means there were a lot of loose balls, a lot of 50-50 balls, there were a lot of block shots, a lot of Jokic getting blocked and getting the ball himself in the paint to try again. Like, that's going to add up, and I understand that was a major factor here. However, Aaron Gordon still had 3 offensive rebounds, and he's the guy you got to look out for. He averaged a ton of offensive rebounds in the regular season, and that was something that was a concern of mine coming into this series. In game 1, the closer game, certainly, the Timberwolves were a +8 on the glass and only allowed 3 offensive rebounds. So, obviously, Rudy Gobert is a major part of that. The Wolves won the points of the paint battle in both games, by the way. They were, I think, a +14 or +16 in game 2. They're actually a +10 points of the paint in game 1. Again, size, obviously, but activity level. And Rudy's going to do his part. He had, I think, 16 rebounds in game 1. That's going to be huge. But it's rebounding all 5. Remember, we talked about Jaden McDaniels corner crashing against the Suns. That's not necessarily the strategy here. But there's got to be a level of activity. There's got to be, I talked about this after game 1, Mike Conley scooping balls up in kind of that mid-range, that like 10 to 18-foot place on the floor where a lot of these long rebounds are going to end up. Mike Conley's got to continue to be active on the glass. They need Jaden McDaniels to continue to be active on the glass at some level. In game 2, McDaniels had 2 rebounds. Conley had 3, and Ant only had 2 in game 2. Again, didn't matter. It was a massive blowout. The Nuggets were just like, just chucking the ball at the rim, had no shot of making shots because of how the Wolves were playing defense. Game 1, Jaden had 8 rebounds. Ant had 7 rebounds. Conley had 4 rebounds. That's what the Wolves need to do in game 3 with Rudy on the floor. And I said Rudy had 16. He had 13 rebounds in game 1. With Rudy on the floor, the rebounding should be much better. But if nothing else, it also provides more attention for the Nuggets, right? It was a free-for-all with no Rudy on the floor. And I know Kat and Naz are both big. They're not as big as Rudy. They're not the rebounding caliber that Rudy is. So Denver, it was just, again, more of a free-for-all. With Rudy on the floor, the gravity that he provides, and I know Chris Finch talks about this all the time, and usually when we're talking gravity, it's about, somebody rolling to the rim, right? Rim gravity and being able to draw the attention of the defense, which opens up just slivers of room for shooters and cutters, right? Defensively, on the glass, gravity matters too. With Rudy on the floor, their mind is going to be completely focused on, let's get this big guy off the glass. That's when Jaden has to sneak in and grab a rebound. And at his size and athleticism, I've been harping on this his whole career, he needs to be able to. I know he's expending energy guarding Jamal Murray. I mean, game 1, he didn't score a point. Jaden was 0 of 7 from the field, but he played great defense and he had 8 boards. Like, that's awesome, right? The Wolves will take that. They need that type of a game out of Jaden again in game 3. It'd be nice if he knocked down a couple open shots, but the rebounding and the defense is so important. And then some of those, almost cheapies that are just 50-50 balls. Over the course of a series, you're going to lose some of those, right? There's going to be some regression to the mean, but 50-50 balls, a lot of that is making your own luck. Like, sometimes there's a bad bounce. I get it. Occasionally, an offensive rebound will be grabbed by sheer luck. It'll bounce right to somebody, whatever. But those balls in the middle of the floor that bounce near the free throw line, like, that's got to be Ant, it's got to be Conley, it's got to be McDaniels, it's got to be Monte Morris when he's on the floor, Kyle Anderson. These guys all have to rebound, because otherwise you're going to have Aaron Gordon sneaking baseline, grabbing a board and getting an easy dunk or kicking it to the corner for KCP to knock down a 3. That's a concern of mine in this game. It's got to be more like game 1. Rebounding wise. And I do think it will be because of Rudy's presence. One of my predictions before the series is that the Wolves would flip the script and win the rebounding battle against Denver. And I was right in game 1. They did. They 100% did. And Denver's a better rebounding team pound for pound than Minnesota. And over the course of the regular season, they were. They need to do what they did in game 1 on the glass. That's going to be super important in this game. Another thing is 3-point volume. Game 1, the Timberwolves were outshot from outside the arc, both takes and makes. Denver is 13-31. They attempted 4 more threes. The Wolves were 11-27. They attempted 4 less and made 2 less threes. Both teams over 40%. So they shot it well in game 1, right? Game 2, the Timberwolves did outshoot Denver from 3, which is crazy considering that Denver was trailing the whole game. The Wolves outshot Denver. They made 4 more and they attempted 3 more. So they shot more and they shot it better. That needs to carry forward in this game. I talked about this the other day. The Timberwolves' 3-point attempt rate in the postseason has been identical to their regular season 3-point attempt rate, which is awesome. I was worried it was a little bit lower because it feels like they've been living in the mid-range because of all these Ant highlight Kobe-esque jumpers. I get it. But they need to keep that 3-point volume up. I think it's 35% of their shot attempts in the postseason have come, according to Cleveland Glass, from outside the arc. That's exactly what it was in the regular season. That volume needs to stay up. A big part of that is Karl-Anthony Towns staying involved. Game 1, Cat had 4 3-point attempts. Game 2, he had 5 3-point attempts. That's fine. That'll work. I'd love him to get 6 or 7. And he's shooting lights out. He's over 50% for 3 in the postseason. More 3-point attempts overall, more for Cat, more corner threes for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which, I mean, he had 5 attempts in game 1 and 7 attempts in game 2. That's awesome. That's awesome for Nickeil. And, of course, he's lethal in the corners. He's one of the league's, I think he might have actually been the best corner 3-point shooter in the entire league this season. Naz is awesome from the corners. He had 4 3-point attempts in game 1 and 8 3-point attempts in game 2. So that volume, especially from these bigs and spacers like Alexander Walker, needs to stay up on 3-point attempts. Denver's is only going to come up as well. I know that they were dead last in the league in 3-point attempt rate, but they're also one of the league's best. They were top 5 in terms of percentage. And if they find themselves down, I could see them really, pushing the envelope in terms of 3-point attempts, maybe even outside of their regular comfort zone, in order to try and keep pace with the Wolves. I want to close by talking about a couple more things. I talked a little about the defense at the beginning. I'll circle back to that, and then a little bit of Cat stuff here. And then I'll give a prediction here for the weekend because there's a game tonight and on Sunday. So I'll predict both of those games. All that is coming up here next. All right, game off. We have to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. It's a whistle. It's a technical foul. You already talked about Monopoly Go, but hey, there's too much stuff that's awesome to talk about regarding Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames, like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Okay, a couple more things here in terms of the preview before I get to my prediction. Offensive flow for Minnesota has been awesome. We talked about this the other day. The Timberwolves have essentially the best. I'm not technically the Pacers passed the Wolves in terms of offensive efficiency in the postseason so far. But the Wolves are within 0.8 points per possession, and the Pacers have played in a bunch of track meets. That's how the Pacers play. They're 4-4 in the postseason so far. After falling to the Knicks again the other night, Rick Carlisle losing his mind. The Wolves are 6-0 in the playoffs, and they're within 0.8 points. So they're technically the second best offense of the playoffs so far. We talked about this extensively on Thursday. Top 5 free throw rate in the playoffs, top 3 offensive rebound rate, second in effective field goal percentage. Turnover rate is still a little bit of an issue, but again, that's the one kind of bugaboo they've had all season. And it's been the flow more than anything else. And occasionally Ant's gone hero ball, but it's never been like unwarranted. I mean, they're 6-0, right? So there's never been a time where it's like, oh, shoot, we're down. Like, they really haven't trailed in the second half of games. I know they were down at halftime, maybe even 3 times against Phoenix, at least twice. The Denver game, was a game of runs. I think they were down by a bucket or 2 at halftime against Denver. It might have been down 4, I think, in game 1. But there's never been like a moment in the fourth quarter where it's like, oh, man, they need, we need to do something to get back and save us. So the first time that happens, and it will at some point in the playoffs, you're not going to run the table in the playoffs, although let's ride the good vibes as long as we can. I'm curious to see if that happens. And there is a time and a place for it. Like, this is just a statement. It's not a direct comparison. There were times where MJ or Kobe had to pull their team to a win, but there were also times when those guys, especially Kobe, because a lot of times, Kobe had other guys who you could run offense through, like obviously Shaq and Pau Gasol. I know Michael had Scotty, a little bit different the way that they operated their offense, but there were places that those teams could go, and Kobe sometimes would try to take over and it didn't work. Same thing with the Wolves. There's a time and a place for it. If Cat's having a bad game, if Cat's in foul trouble, if Rudy's having a bad game, can't catch the ball, if nobody's making perimeter jumpers, and Ant needs to take over, fine, because he can do it. It gives you a puncher's chance at that point if you're down 10 in the fourth quarter. But the biggest thing for me that I want to see over the course of the game is this continued offensive flow that they've shown. And Ant could pick his spots. He's been making the right read all 6 games so far in the postseason. If you're going to put 2+ on the ball, 2 to 3 guys on the ball, I'm going to make the smart pass. Sometimes it's a skip pass to the weak side corner. Sometimes it's the easy, next pass in the rotation, and the ball may swing back to me and I get an open shot. Other times it's probing. And this is what game 1, this is what I was so impressed with against Denver. They were in a controlled drop where they were essentially forming like a little perimeter around Ant. Like, he would dribble inside the 3-point arc and Jokic would drop and drop and drop. And they would kind of keep 1 to 2 defenders near him. So they weren't crowding him. They were daring him to shoot mid-range jumpers. They were trying to corral him, basically. It was like watching cattle dogs on a ranch, right? Like trying to be around him and keep him from getting into the paint, but keep him from getting off a completely open jumper. And Ant found the soft spots and made the right play more often than not. Occasionally it was slithering all the way to the rim around Jokic. We saw that in game 2. Occasionally it was pulling up for the mid-range, and occasionally it was kicking the pass to the perimeter, back to the perimeter. And of course he scored 43 in game 1. So obviously what he did made sense. But to keep that offensive flow, to run some offense through Cat, to do some of the big pick and roll with Cat and Rudy and keep Jokic in that action as much as possible, make him work, that's huge. So just to continue that offensive flow, and then when things break down or when you're in a tough spot, which hasn't happened really yet, but, And I don't want to discount like withstanding runs in Phoenix. And of course, game one against Denver, when they were up 18-4, Denver came back and took a lead all in the first quarter. That would have been, a previous version of the Wolves would have collapsed. That isn't this Wolves team. But at some point, there will be real adversity in the second half of one of these playoff games. And will the Wolves be able to maintain that offensive movement that's been so impressive and that has led to the best location effective field goal percentage, like we talked about Thursday, the best shot selection, statistically speaking, of any team in the playoffs, the second best overall effective field goal percentage of any team in the playoffs? I'm very curious about that. I talked about the defense in the beginning, so not much more there. I just think they'll be back to guarding Joker one-on-one with basically no doubles. I think it'll just be Cat, and then it'll be Naz, maybe Kyle Anderson, and let's provide some resistance. And when he gets into the paint, Rudy's there. Rudy's there to it's the this actually came up. I can't remember who. It might have actually been Jokic, or maybe it was no, it wasn't Jokic. It was a former player on a podcast, and I cannot remember which one. Talking about the defense the Lakers played. It might have been, no, it wasn't LeBron. I can't remember who it was, but I saw it on a podcast in the last few days. Because who hasn't been listening to all the national podcasts this week after the Wolves' incredible game 2 the other day? But whoever it was talking about how the Lakers in the bubble played that essentially what the Wolves are doing now, similar with Dwight Howard and Anthony Davis, and using Dwight Howard as the guy who's roaming and blocking shots. And that's essentially what the Wolves are doing now, but Rudy's better than late stage Dwight Howard, obviously. And that's what they're doing to Joker. That's the defense to play against Joker. Put a physical body on him, make him work for everything he gets, try and force him into tough fadeaways, try and force him into three-pointers, contested three-pointers. And if he does get himself into the paint, Rudy's there. And Rudy's also there, to not overcommit, to not truly double, because he can also peel off and guard that lob to Aaron Gordon, the patented lob that never gets broken up except for when it did in game 1 by Rudy, and the lobs to other guys or, baseline cutters, corner shooters. Rudy's there to help disrupt that. And that's the plan against Joker. I think they go back to that. Less traps on the ball with Jokic. Keep your guys, keep the perimeter guys at home to guard KCP and shooters from the perimeter. And Jamal Murray, I guess, to a lesser extent, until he makes me eat my words. Hopefully not, but we'll see. I don't want to play with fire with Jamal Murray. So, stay home on those guys. Make Joker beat you scoring the basketball with Rudy lurking behind him, playing off of Aaron Gordon, the defense we expected the Wolves to play in this series. I think that comes back. All right. My predictions, I said this on Wednesday on the basketball party. If you missed that show, you can go back and listen to it and get takes from myself, Jack Borman from Canis Supis, as well as Reggie Wilson from Care 11 and Ron Johnson from the Ron Johnson Show. And my prediction was that the Wolves would lose game 3. I know I'm a Debbie Downer, but I just got to believe the Nuggets are a good team. They're one of the best 3 teams in the NBA. They were all season. They're going to have a little bit more fight. Michael Malone's a good coach, other than the Murray calf injury, and I guess we'll see with Reggie Jackson. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if this team was better without Reggie Jackson. But it also just goes to show how much they don't trust the younger players, which is worrisome, right? Go back to some of the Calvin Booth interviews in the offseason talking. It sounded very, what did he say? There was some quote where he said something about, we don't want to just go back to back. We want to build a dynasty. Very Golden State Warriors, Joe Lacob, like, hey, we're smarter than everybody else sounding. See how that's turning out, right? Like, we're going to rely on these young guys who we actually then don't trust after a full season. Anyway, I hope Reggie Jackson and Jamal Murray play, honestly. And I think Murray will. Who knows on Jackson? Anyway, I still worry about, I think they lose a close game Friday night. There's so much, there's going to be a little offensive rust, a little bit of maybe flipping back to the Rudy defense could throw them off a little bit of maybe overhypeness in Target Center. Obviously, I hope I'm wrong. I think they lose a close game Friday. I think they come back and win, maybe not even a close game. I think they win on Sunday in game 4, and it goes back to Denver with a 3-1 lead. And I think the Wolves will close it out in Denver, and I'll amend that if I feel based on how the weekend goes. And hopefully on Monday, we're talking sweet. Hopefully on Monday, we're not talking about going back to Denver, and we're already looking ahead to either OKC or Dallas, which, by the way, that series is now 1-1. And we'll have plenty of time next week. I'm not trying to look too far ahead or jinx anything at all to look at that matchup. But I like how the Wolves match up with both OKC and Dallas. I prefer the Dallas matchup a little, but I like the matchup with both of them. And of course, either way, you're dealing with Luka or you're dealing with SGA. I know Dallas also has Kyrie, but that's kind of it. And with Maxi Kleber out, there's an advantage there for Minnesota. So that series is 1-1. Keep an eye on that. But anyway, postcast tonight, Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, live after the game. So roughly 11:15 or so tonight. That'll be Jack. It'll either be Jack or Tyler from Kana Supis joining Luke Inman on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. That audio will be on this audio feed late tonight. So be sure to check that out this weekend. I will be back on Monday, which will be the post-game pod following Sunday's game 4 and hopefully a Wolves sweep. But either way, I'll be back on Monday talking the weekend of Wolves Nuggets. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first episode, your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon at Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's now also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.